Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high-quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin, and we're happy to be your guides for this limited series.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Join us on this journey to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters. All right, well, we're back at Quality Matters, and today we have the great fortune of having Karla Phillips-Krivickas from Inclusive Strategies joining us. And I'm excited. I know a little bit about your story. We heard about it on some of our education meetups, but I'm looking forward today to hearing more about what drives your work and what has informed your work. And I think a good place to get us started would be to just jump right in. Based off of all of your life experiences, give us a little snapshot as to how you got to where you are and what's motivated you to do this incredible work.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to meet you in person.
Yeah.
I advocate for students with disabilities, but oftentimes people assume that means I'm working with families, designing IEPs, and that's not my game. I'm a policy person. I came at this work from a very different perspective. Even though I am a mom, I have a son with ADD and a daughter with Down syndrome and autism. I had the privilege of working in the legislature as an education policy advisor. I served a governor, served a state superintendent, worked for Governor Jeb Bush's foundation for many years, and now I'm on the State Board of Education. So when I think of advocating for students with disabilities, I'm thinking about policies, regulations, statewide initiatives. How are students with disabilities going to be included in those?
Yeah. Absolutely. And a lot of what we talk about, of course, the name of the podcast is Quality Matters, is this notion of quality. And in a lot of the work that you're talking about, you have all sorts of different perspectives on quality, from both the policy creator and then as the recipient of the policies that are being created for people, in your state and in your cities. When you think of quality, are there any specific factors that go into the work you do that you hope creates quality outcomes?
From a basic perspective, my outcome is getting policies passed, whether it's a state board regulation, whether it's a piece of legislation, whether it's guidance, it's policy related. That's my personal goal and outcome. I also measure myself on blogs that I produce and policy briefs and things like that. But ultimately, the goal is to improve academic outcomes. And I just touched on this in a session earlier, that often when it comes to students with disabilities, that is not the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all about compliance. And there's lots of reasons why it's driven that way, possibly potentially from federal law, but it's all about compliant IEPs and quality control and funding. And we're not asking the basic question of, are they learning to read? So I had a statistic earlier that showed that in Arizona, I think it's only 43% of third graders statewide are reading on grade level.
Wow.
Third grade.
Wow.
It's not that different nationally, but still. Yep. But the worst part is I think it's 14% of students with disabilities are reading in third grade. Those are the questions, and that's part of my goal and my long-term outcome is to change that conversation, to allow people to have the freedom to start asking that. Because I've also learned that I think people are almost afraid to ask that. And I'm so one of the things I joke about is giving policymakers permission to ask tough questions about special ed.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you mentioned is the IEP process. And so many of our listeners probably are not familiar with what that is, and that's okay. So it's the individualized education plans, right? This is a sort of product and function of federal law, federal IDEA law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act law. Okay, well,
Very good acronym definition.
Yeah, a lot of acronyms in education, and it gets confusing for all of us at various points. But one of the things I want to ask is, what do you think the relationship is currently like in conventional public schools between, say, IEPs and quality outcomes? right? Because I think, I mean, I wanna be generous to folks who help pass IDEA, right? Initially, I think people were well intended. Um, is it working? I guess is it producing the kind of outcomes you think that are just like everybody's excited about it? I don't want to put my thumb on the scale, but I would love to know. You're an expert in this space. What's that relationship like?
There's a whole lot in that question.
Okay.
And I would try to be generous and grace as well. But on one level, you can argue that IDEA has been a resounding win. Because I think oftentimes we forget that IDEA was not a special ed law. It was part of the civil rights movement. And I often remind people, my daughter did not have access to public schools until 1975.
Wow.
So if you think about it from an access civil rights perspective, it's been a resounding success because every child with a disability has the entitled right to attend a public school.
Yeah.
And if you look at IDA and IEPs, they're really not about academic outcomes. They have been over time through rulemaking and through other things that the state agencies and federal agencies have done, rightfully so. But at its core, it was a piece of civil rights legislation.
And really more about access. Okay, so maybe if I can just press in on this a little bit more. I mean, my experience has been that having sat through some IEP meetings, and often, again, for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with this, there are a lot of people in an IEP meeting, often, right? You've got teachers, so there's faculty members, there might be school administrators, you've got parents, you've got sometimes advocates who come in on, alongside parents. It can be really confusing. I think hard to navigate for many people. It's definitely time consuming, etc. And I have yet to see an IEP meeting where everybody leaves and it's like high fives and everybody's like, that was awesome.
That went great.
That was great. Is that I mean, am I just off on that? Have I been to the wrong meetings or what?
No, you're absolutely right. But I will tell you from a parent perspective, it's all of them against me. I mean, all those people you outlined, they're on one side of the table, so to speak.
Wow.
Unless you have maybe your spouse, but unless you have an advocate, it's us against them. And schools don't intend it to be that way, but that's just what it is. I mean, think of all the people you just listed.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I had 3 IEP meetings last year with my daughter. She just transferred to a different school. And I had to hire an advocate for the first time in my life. With all that I know, I was overwhelmed. And I came home, it's funny you use that example, from the first, and I shared this with my special ed director in a big district. I told her that when I came home from the first meeting, I cried. And she was, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I did it. I'm like, no, it wasn't anything you did. It was so overwhelming.
Yeah.
So overwhelming. And I this is what drives the work I do. If I feel that way, with all that I know, and I don't mean to sound boastful, I've just been blessed with pretty great experiences, but with all I know, how do other parents navigate this?
Right.
I don't even know if I was advocating for the right things. I'm like, I don't know. Like you're like, woohoo, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I got what I needed, let alone what I wanted.
Wow.
So I love hearing you talk about your work because it's personal and because you've been so motivated and thus been really successful in doing a lot of good work on behalf of students with disabilities and improving the quality of all students' educational experiences because of that. Are there specific policies or achievements that you are most proud of and that you think sort of had the most effective impact in your work?
Effective impact has yet to be determined. It takes a while to see that in education. Yeah, I have some that were really important to me, but I will tell you if I had, now remember I'm on the state board, so I also have a different hat that I wear.
In Arizona, we should
Correct.
say. In Arizona, yeah.
If I could work on one issue or focus on or emphasize one issue, we should all be doubling down on third grade reading. That's the statistics I just gave you.
Yeah.
The fact that only 50%, give or take, nationally are reading by third grade should be keeping us all up at night.
Sure.
There's no sense of urgency. I mean, some people do, don't get me wrong, but that would be the one that I would continue to double down on. And where I've ended up spending the majority of my time really isn't in the policy. It's kind of what I was talking about earlier in my session.
Yeah.
So I call it breaking down the myths of special ed.
Okay.
So I have like one slide that has pictures of a girl with autism, a girl with Down syndrome, a boy in a wheelchair, and these are the stereotypical images of special ed. But that's the small fraction of special ed.
Okay.
The majority of kids who are receiving special education services and supports have invisible disabilities like dyslexia, like ADD, like speech language impairments. There is no reason why those kids are not achieving on par with their peers.
So this is so interesting because we had a conversation with Dr. Ashley Berner from Johns Hopkins University, and she just came out with a great book. But one of the things she spoke about was this notion of under-challenging students and setting expectations here, where they then meet here, instead of setting expectations here, where students, maybe they don't meet them here, but they definitely increase, from here. What are your thoughts on, are we under challenging students? How detrimental is it? What needs to be done to combat it?
I think that's an understatement.
Okay.
It's an understatement. I literally had someone
Under-challenging is an understatement.
in the school telling me, well, we don't want to stress her out. I'm like, school's supposed to be hard. Now, I also, not every parent feels the same way I do. So I made it very clear to everybody who's in contact with her. In fact, I sent an email last night. Here's a funny story. So she had to answer some question about what she would have told her younger self, and she got distracted clearly and wrote the lyrics to some Taylor Swift song. I was not having that, but not every parent would react that way. So I sent an email last night and said, just so you know, I sat her down. I said, this is unacceptable. And if it happens again, you will redo it at home with me. So I go out of my way to give them the permission to, no, you're going to push her.
Okay.
But it's an understatement. And I think what's even more disturbing, because again, thinking about the vast majority of kids with the invisible disabilities, how often it goes undiagnosed, unrecognized, and unserved. Just assuming that a kid is zoning out, he doesn't pay attention, he's goofing off, and not really recognizing that there's something else going on there.
Okay.
Well, she doesn't speak up in class. Well, maybe she has a speech language impairment, or well, they don't participate. Maybe it's because they're 3 grade levels behind. Really making these observations about our students that affects those expectations without really recognizing that maybe they just need a different way
Yeah.
to express themselves.
If we could maybe zoom out for a sec, I'm really curious in thinking about some of your like legislative, not so much advocacy, but like legislation creation, and policy creation. You've got, that background, and that's something that most people will never do, right? Most people in their lives never sit down and kind of wordsmith something that could become a state law. And we know that most education law is driven at the state level. So you don't even have to answer this in the education context, but are there components that you keep in mind when you were, back when you were like helping to craft legislation and policy that were sort of the hallmarks of really sound policy? So for instance, you might say something like, I know a friend who does a little bit, and he would say, well, whatever we're writing about, whether it's transportation policy or education policy or what have you, we want to make sure that it's fiscally neutral. He might say something like that. Are there components that you think about that are sort of that typify quality policy and quality pieces of legislation?
I think the answer to that actually lies in why I do what I do.
Okay.
If you would have asked me during those almost 20 years state policy level experience, Karla, are you making sure that we're including all kids in these policies? I would have said absolutely. And then it took me time to realize that we were not. Okay. And that's really what's driving my work is making sure that we're including all kids, and that oftentimes we were exempting kids with well-meaning, like exempting kids with a disability from the K-3 reading laws, because most people down there don't know enough about special ed, and that's probably been my biggest lesson learned. Can I share with you my 3 big lessons?
Please.
So one is I dramatically underestimated how much people know about special ed. I also dramatically underestimated how much people even in education know
Okay.
then unless you're in special ed, even a lot of superintendents, principals are just not very well versed. They're running the bigger school and they kind of leave it to that department
Sure.
to handle that.
Sure.
But the problem is, and I alluded to this earlier, if you have these perceptions of who's in special ed, even that's not an appropriate term, right? It's not a place. But if it's the kid with Down syndrome, if it's the kid who with the visual impairment, the problem is policy-wise, is you inadvertently, you've created a system that you think is super expensive. You think it's super hard, and you have really low academic expectations. So I often joke, you're thinking about my daughter, not my son. You're not thinking about the gifted kid with ADD. You're not thinking about the gifted kid with dyslexia. They're not. But the problem is if you have those stereotypes, it affects policies. And that's what I'm realizing that's kind of what I'm drilling at a lot when I'm working on these bills. For example, there was a big state dual enrollment initiative 2 years ago. I worked super hard with friends that I'm eternally grateful for at the Capitol to get one sentence in that bill. And that was that IEPs and 504 plans had to be honored in dual enrollment. Okay. You would think that makes sense, but it didn't.
Right.
But again...
Right, you would think it would just follow the student, right? It's theirs personal plan.
Right, so if they're going to be enrolled in any, right.
Yeah. It's common sense.
Now, legally, the community colleges believe that they didn't have to honor that, but I won't go into the legal debate. But when I'm talking to policymakers, if in the back of their head they have these images of special ed, and it's not something we discuss publicly, but trust me, it's become very clear to me that that's what happens. It doesn't make sense. They're having a hard time grappling with why dual enrollment is applicable to those kids. They're not thinking about the vast majority of kids with invisible disabilities who absolutely should be in those courses.
Right.
So that implication affects my policy work a lot now. That's really more about breaking down the myths and misunderstandings of special ed.
Okay.
So how do people break down these misunderstandings or these wrong ideations about special ed? What have been successful ways that you've combated these incorrect narratives?
Yeah, and maybe to piggyback that question too, how do you, when you're thinking about educating legislators and policymakers who are rotating, right? I mean, they may be rotating every 2 years or what have you.
So you're
so you have so you've got you're redoing the learning cycle all the time. So yeah.
That's true of every issue, though, by the way, because of that rotating cycle.
Right. Yeah.
I haven't seen that great of efforts to do that.
Okay.
So I'm trying to do it in two different ways. One is, coming to conferences like this and speaking about it. Mm-hmm. One of the statistics I throw out there that blows people away, 67% of kids with IEPs spend their entire day in a regular class.
67% of kids with IEPs spend their days in regular classes.
Okay.
That's a federally measured indicator, by the way.
Okay.
Technically, it's over 80%, but it's the majority of their day.
And
that blows people away.
And that statistic proves that 67% of people who fall into the special education bucket are actually not necessarily looking like the people that everybody has this preconceived notion, the stereotype. Okay.
I call them the invisible disabilities.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they're in every classroom, every classroom in America.
So you just have to continue to sort of beat that drum, so that people hear it and have in mind the full scope of, student needs when they're crafting policy.
But think about it. If the majority of kids are in general education classrooms, there's huge policy implications to that, whether you're thinking about the cost or the class size or expectations or academic outcomes. They're not thinking of those kids. They're thinking of the kids in the self-contained classes that, how it was when we were in school, quite frankly, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're talking to you at the Emerging School Models Conference. How are you... I gather that you wouldn't be here unless you were at least somewhat enthusiastic about it. It's a long way to come from Arizona all the way to Cambridge. But this could be really tricky. Now, instead of educating one state system or district system, you could be educating, I don't know, tens of thousands of micro school operators and so forth. And what challenges do you foresee in this new education landscape?
It's a great question, but can I go back? I just remembered something I forgot to tell you, though.
Oh, yeah.
What I'm doing policy-wise to try to break that down is everywhere I can in regulation or law, I'm requiring that we break out data by the 13 disabilities. So under federal law, there's 13 disability categories. Mm-hmm. Okay. But typically, what do you see? students with disabilities, kind of one bucket, and then you have English language learners, gifted, those, the buckets, right? Well, if you're looking at K-3 reading, and as you know, every state in America is working on K-3 reading. It's a high priority. If we're not disaggregating by 13, we're never going to know if we're going to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Because you're looking at kids with autism and dyslexia in the same bucket.
Right. You're comparing bananas to apples and apples to blueberries.
Correct. So I'm really pushing that, and it shocks people when they see that data. And quite frankly, they're like, you can get that? They don't even know that data exists because no one's ever asked. But the federal government requires us to disaggregate that data, but it's just never been very public. So it's one of the ways I'm trying to get people to ask different questions when they see that data. But back to your question, remind me of the question again.
Yeah, sort of just how you think about now with this emerging market,
emerging schools.
Yeah, I mean, are you going to, will you be trying to educate tens of thousands of micro school leaders or hybrid school leaders, or so that maybe they realize that the educational experience that they're crafting can be more inclusive, right? Because maybe they have preconceptions about the students and the disabilities that might be coming their way, and they think, oh, I could never support those needs, but they might be wrong on that, it sounds like.
Well, I did something probably a little controversial. So my session, I think the name of it was Emerging Models for Students with Disabilities or Special Needs. And I had some slides, and one of them was, I'm going to turn the question on its head. And I said, I'm questioning the supposition of that is that kids with disabilities need different models. So I said, what if we asked how we can leverage all this new innovation and flexibility to design more accessible models for all kids? So it's a very fundamentally different question. Because underlying question, right, as it was posed to us, assumes that they need different models. Some do. I'm not going to discount that. And I'm a huge school choice advocate. I always have been. And trust parents to make the best decisions for their kids. And some kids do. But most kids do not. Just like they do in public schools, most kids are in general education classes. So that was kind of how I flipped that a little bit.
Yeah.
Hopefully I challenged them to think a little bit differently about it.
I know. I'm just sitting here myself thinking that's such a great inversion of a question. And that whole idea of, sort of taking what you're given and then actually taking what the information that you're given and then actually asking, what if the information that you're given is, again, answering the wrong question, which makes me long-winded way of coming to this next thought, which is this idea of the best fit. We've had lots of conversations, again, not surprising that the conference in which we're doing these interviews hosts many different people who are starting educational models to support a vast range of different needs for students. So there's a lot of conversation about fit. In your experience, both with your own kids and also this idea, from a much bigger perspective, are people more inclined to focus on a good fit and give that metric validity in actually choosing new educational models and supports?
I'm going to show grace because I think they do.
Okay.
Because again, I live in Arizona. I live in the home of school choice. This, fit has been a conversation for a long time.
Sure.
One of the things I said in the session was what we've done historically is we design curriculums, textbooks, models, whatever you want to call them, for a la Todd Rose, the traditional mythical average kid that doesn't exist. So then we come out with this model, and then we go, oh, what are we going to do with those kids? And that could be English language learners. They could be students with disabilities.
Anybody that's different.
And then we go down the route of accommodations, and we're right back where we started. But I think that idea of fit goes back to the people don't understand what a disability is.
Okay.
A disability is something you never outgrow, and it's something that it's biological. And the reason I think that's important is because by definition, in order to qualify under IDEA, you need to have specially designed instruction or accommodations to access the general curriculum. Doesn't matter if it's Montessori or if it's a classical. So this idea that there's a perfect fit for a kid with disability, there is no perfect fit.
Right.
They need, so I use the very, I think, more obvious example of a kid with a visual impairment. If a student is, let's say, completely visually impaired, it doesn't matter if it's a classical school or Montessori school. They're going to need some way to access the curriculum.
Yeah. That's a great take on a conversation around a topic that's been involved in a lot of our conversations, but a different perspective, which I appreciate. This idea that there's no perfect fit. There are fits that, again, probably put a student in a better position to access the curriculum, but there is no perfect fit. And so what else needs to be considered when trying to educate a student in becoming their best self?
You know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of this piece of equipment, this piece of technology that I have for my laptop, and it plugs in one way to the USB to my laptop, and then it has a bunch of different ports on it, right? It's got a USB-C port and a USB, 3, and an HDMI, and it's got a bunch of different things on it, so that I can connect other things, right? And in some ways, that what we're looking for is that IEP is supposed to be that piece of technology that can bridge to these other things, right? But it sounds like, we're not looking for the one. If one size doesn't fit all for general education students, then how could it possibly
There you go.
do the same for students with different needs, right? Yeah, and Arizona has obviously been a leader in that, in sort of showing the way, but there's more work to be done everywhere. That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think oftentimes when we think of models, we're thinking about what we're teaching the kids. But especially for accessibility, I think it's time to think about the other end of it. What kind of flexibility can we give the learners to demonstrate what they know?
Yeah.
So I gave the example of my daughter's second grade teacher who was amazing and, doing weekly spelling quiz in second grade. And she intuitively knew that kids needed different ways to demonstrate their knowledge. So kids got to pick from, they had letter blocks. They could do it verbally. They could write it on the chalkboard. They could use crayon, any way they could use.
Wow.
That's accessibility.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, here's the model, here's what we're teaching them, but let's give them flexibility in how they demonstrate what they know.
I love it. Well, Karla, we just want to thank you for educating at least
Us.
me. Us. The IDEA and the IEP space is really complex. You have definitely educated us a little bit. We just appreciate you being with us today and talking a little bit about quality. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me and thank you for asking the questions.
You bet.
Awesome.
All right.
All right, Shaka, that was a great conversation with Karla from Inclusive Strategies.
Yep.
Every time I hear from her, I have a new sense of appreciation for the work that she's doing because of the passion that she exudes.
Yeah.
It's very clear. Her passion is as genuine as it comes because she's talking about her children and both the ways that they've been treated properly and both the ways that they haven't been acknowledged in the way that they deserve to be.
Yep.
So I feel like there's a lot to break down from the conversation because she offered so many different pieces of pearls of wisdom.
Yep.
But was there anything that specifically stuck out to you or what's kicking around in your mind right now?
Two things kind of jump out to me that I wonder if we can touch on. One is that more than some of our other guests that we've had several academics, we've had folks who are in kind of the entrepreneurial space, various industries, what have you. She has a background of actually writing policy that becomes state law, right? Or becomes school district policy, writing legislation, for instance. That is a pretty unique perspective. And so I thought it was great to hear somebody to kind of talk about the practicalities.
Okay.
And so she mentioned, for instance, lawmakers writing laws mostly with the general education population in mind.
Right.
The something like 85% of students who do not have disabilities.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Right. And so if you're doing that, there's a real practical reason to do that. It's 85 kids. 85% of kids is not nothing.
Right. Absolutely.
It's a big deal. But if you're doing that and excluding the remaining percentage, that's those kids are not nothing either.
Yeah.
Right? So I think about that. And then the other piece was about being under-challenged and underestimated. Man, that's such a good point. She says she just thinks that a lot of people, even folks who are working in the education space, underestimate what students with special needs can do and can achieve. And she was speaking really, mostly in the academic space,
Right.
right? And so I thought that was really important.
It's continuously surprising to me that every time we talk about this notion of under challenging kids, how enthusiastic everybody is on the thought, because how real everybody feels
Yeah.
that it is. And it reminds me of when I was younger. Growing up, my parents would always say, it's something to the effect of, it's a gift that we have high expectations for you. Whether it translated to the feeling as a child, like I really have to perform. I really have to give it my best. I really have to, work hard. And am I going to be able to meet their expectations? Am I going to be able to make them proud in the way?
Right.
And what I now realize is that just the act of trying to achieve those expectations, working really hard, that was what made them proud, A. And B, how lucky was I that I had people in my life, my parents or teachers at school, who were setting the bar super high. And listening to Karla, it does hit a little bit home. I was incredibly challenged growing up with my dyslexia. Had to go to a different school for a little while, had to have lots of different supports throughout those formative years of education. And I was perpetually told, well, I should rephrase this. I was told by a lot of people, maybe this is the, college or route you want to take. That absolutely was not, would not have pushed me, would not have challenged me. And then I was told by other people, forget it. Like, forget what diagnosis you have, forget how, you learn in a different way. You focus on becoming the best person you can be. You focus on meeting your expectations and pursuing the different challenges that you want. That's why I'm in education, because when I was growing up, I had people that challenged me appropriately and that met those challenges with support and encouraged it, and then provided the support that was needed. So I am just, again, continuously surprised and encouraged. It's like a, inverse reaction by the fact that so many people are like, yes, we are under challenging, and yes, we need to change that. And yes, we have to increase our expectations.
Yeah.
So,
well, it in thinking about this symposium, where we interviewed Karla at this Emerging School Models Symposium here at Harvard, it makes me think that there's an opportunity, and hopefully education entrepreneurs and leaders and school startup folks take the opportunity that's presented.
Yeah.
But there's an opportunity to be the encouragement and to challenge students with special needs, like in the appropriate way, I think.
Right.
And now do it at a much more like personal, localized level. Versus where I think we all know a lot of kids get sort of fall through the cracks in these big systems that are not set up to spend time with a student with what Karla referred to as like some of the unseen, right? Some of the unseen disabilities.
Yeah.
A lot of those students fall through the cracks. How many adults end up getting diagnosed with ADHD? And I say, boy, I wish I would have known this when I was 9, right? That would have made a huge difference. And I suspect that in some of these emerging models that we're hearing about and learning about, that are happening, in many cases because of new school choice laws, I think there's a real opportunity to identify students who they just need to come in through a different door sometimes. It's not that we've got to, quote, dumb things down or whatever. It's just we gotta help them access the content with a different strategy.
Yeah, I think it was interesting what she said about there's so many people. The question needs to start getting asked: why are people operating in that way? Why does this student look disengaged? Is it because they have an auditory processing complication? Or why is this student not speaking? Well, they have a speech language. What are the reasons that students may be presenting in an atypical way? Because in reality, maybe what happens when you address it is that you realize, they're a minor adjustment makes accessibility to the education and to the curriculum a lot
Mm-hmm.
more achievable for them.
Mm-hmm. Did you? I'm curious. In your own educational experience, or I don't think you would have done this as a teacher, given where you were teaching. But you can correct me. Do you know much? Do you have much personal interaction with that IEP process or IDEA process, or with colleagues or other folks? I was just really struck by. You could tell. Hopefully, folks will see this on video, and so that they can go back, watch part one, and see Carla's face when I asked her about IEPs.
Yeah.
She was like, "Yeah, she does not have. There's not much that you could say charitably about the IEP process,
Right.
right? Did you have much experience with that?
So it's interesting. When I was a teacher, I was teaching kindergarten, which was rarely did we have students, in my experience, coming in at that age level with an IEP.
Right.
Um,
That's when a lot of things start to
Oftentimes we
Start
had
get
exactly we
identifying.
were the start of those
Yeah.
conversations, identifying learning style differences or potential opportunities where those conversations would need to be had later on. In my own experience, I had an IEP, and I had a mom who was a teacher and two parents who were committed advocates, whether that meant finding information on their own, finding support
Yep.
on their own. And I was really fortunate to have sort of had them steering the ship of what it looked like to be supported appropriately in school. And I don't know what it looked like for um, them to create those and be involved in the conversations you described. And then Karla reaffirmed it's her and her husband on the other side of the table from all those different peoples.
How
And I'd be
intimidating.
curious if that was an experience that my parents had and what that
Right.
felt like. Because as we heard her talk, and as she said after, she fights for her children every single day in every aspect of her life, not just her work. When she goes to the grocery store, all of it.
Right.
And I don't know what that would feel like, to feel like you're sitting on the other side of the table constantly, the proverbial table on the
Yeah.
other side, as
Yeah.
you are advocating for your children who deserve to be recognized in a way that's different from the other 85%.
Yeah. So, man, it makes me think of two things, and you brought one up. One is when she described, it feels like it's us against them.
Mhm.
The them being, unfortunately, maybe a school leader, maybe some
Yeah.
other administrators, other faculty members, what have you. And I've sat in those meetings, and I was sort of the first time doing it, like gobsmacked by, like, man, there's a lot of people in this
Mhm. Mhm.
room. Um,
Yeah.
It's hard for the parent to feel like they're not outmatched, right, by all
Right.
the expertise in the room. I will say, I don't think there are any stronger advocates for their child's educational, like, sort of trajectory than parents of students with special needs.
Yep.
I mean, because they've had to learn at an early age how to navigate this crazy system, etc. But I want to now add, we should maybe get a running ledger. I want to add something to my markers of quality.
Mm.
And I think I want to add that dynamic, like an us versus them in the legal world, there's a type of argument. It's called en banc. It's this a hearing where it's the lawyer and you get the entire panel of judges, and it's like super intimidating,
Wow.
right? So they're like in kind of an arc, and they're just firing questions at you, and it's really high stakes, and
Yeah.
it's very intimidating. Even for the most experienced lawyers. That is not how a school and parent
Absolutely
relationship
not.
should feel.
No.
It's not adversarial.
Yeah.
B, we should be trying to do the same thing, which is elevate the well-being of children, of the student.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think what I want to add to the ledger, or to the list, is that I want to say, all right, the mark of a quality school, is there a real partnership?
Yeah.
Is there a real partnership between parents and faculty, however large or small that
Right.
is?
And I bet what you'd find is that I would consider that a quality in the world of inputs.
Okay.
So, and what I think you would find is that schools that had that box checked on quality inputs would have quality outputs checked as well. Because I think the partnership, how many of our conversations this week referenced this idea of needing that communication between parents and or needing the partnership, between parents and school affiliates.
Yeah.
You have Superintendent Alberto Carvalho saying parents should be they should be fiery and armed with dangerous information.
Yeah.
I think in hopes so that they can, add to that partnership. They can be informed enough to enter into that partnership in a contributing factor.
Right.
And so to your point, partnership is crucial. And we've had lots of different people hint on that.
Yeah.
And maybe not explicitly share that the partnership is what they're looking to achieve.
Right.
But they've talked about all different ways that they're creating an environment where partnerships can thrive and exist.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good place to stop, is maybe we ask our listeners and viewers what are, maybe I would love to know, like, tactically.
Sure.
What are some of the tactics that folks have seen? And I would really love to hear from our viewers who are not in the education space. Like, what are some of the tactics that you've seen that have increased the partnership between, say, the operator and the end user?
Okay.
Right.
I love
So
that
whether or not
question.
that's a business and the customer, whether it's the school and the family, like, what are the ways that you have really meaningful partnership beyond just the once a year, beginning of the school year spaghetti dinner, which, we had a guest who said he didn't like the spaghetti dinners. I have to say, I do like the spaghetti dinners because I like spaghetti. That's okay. But how do we make sure that, let's not just check that box and say, well,
we did it.
We got together. We had overcooked spaghetti and somebody lectured for 45 minutes.
That's right.
What does meaningful partnership look like in this context between schools and families, but really in any industry?
Yeah. I think that's a great question, and I can't wait to see what people have to say.
All right. Sounds good. Always good to chat.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thanks,
Shaka.
Caitlin.